Welcome, everybody. On today's episode, we are going to talk about no tools fiber prep. Welcome, everybody. I'm Kathy, and this is Woolmaven. I'm so glad you're here. Big news if you haven't heard, I have a spinning membership. Head on over to, if you're interested in joining, I'd love to have you head on over to woolmaven.com/join, and you'll see the details. Love to have you. And if you're interested in spinning, it's the place to be. Anyway, on to today's episode. My dog's knocking around. No tools fiber prep. The reason I thought about doing this episode is because so often, especially for the new folks, when you get going, it seems like you've got a wheel or even a spindle. Well, next thing you know, you need this, and the next thing you know, you need that, and this and that are are fairly substantial purchases. So you need hand cards, and then maybe you want a drum carder, then you need some combs, and just over and over again. And do you actually need those things? And the answer actually is no. Those are wonderful to have. And I do have all of my little history of the tools I purchased in a previous podcast called Upping My Game, where I go over what I bought, when I bought it, and what it did for me. And there's some tools I have that I love and I feel have made a huge, huge difference to me, but you don't need them. You just don't need them, especially with all your options today on how great your fiber comes to you, like straight out of the box, and even quite a bit of the farm purchases. You don't need those tools to get going. And sure, the tools will help, but you can do quite a bit without them if you want to get started and just start learning to work with some fiber and getting some spinning done and putting in a little bit more time and maybe trying a few different methods and seeing what you like before you make the decision to purchase. There she is over there in the corner. Anyway, so the first thing regarding no tools fiber prep is, hey everybody, was out on my dog walk and realized that I forgot a actually fairly important aspect of any fleece you'd want to prepare without tools. And honestly, if you're like, what's with the dog walk? I come up with all kinds of thinking clarification on the dog walk. But anyway, the thing I forgot to say, and this is so upfront and center, kind of obvious, is start out with the best fleece you can. If you start out with a fleece that's kind of matted up on the ends or has a ton of vegetable matter in it, wow, you're asking for a really tough go of things, especially if you don't want to do tools. So if you start out with a clean, high quality fleece, that is going to make your life so much easier. Why not start with a fleece or breed specific wool that will make things the easiest for you, just to get things opened up and separated out. Whereas the medium or the workhorse fleeces, they come, at least quite a few of them, already with quite a bit of built-in air right in the fleece. So there's just much less work for you to do. Then on the other end of that is obviously, at least fleece-wise, is the long wools. And to me, those are going to probably require a little bit of tool work as well. Now, depending on how picky you are, there can be some fairly simple tools. If you're going to go with like no tools whatsoever, your easiest hit is going to be a medium fleece. It'll just start with a more spinner friendly fiber right off the animal. Then the other thing I thought of on the dog walk that I wanted to add in here is all of my suggestions here, like kind of steer clear of fine wool and steer clear of long wool. That is with me assuming that you're pretty new. You're pretty new. If you're very comfortable at the wheel and you've been doing this a while, gosh, you can do just about anything you want. But if you're new, it'll be probably much easier on you if you want to go without tools to stick to the mediums, or go with something that you already get prepared, ready to go roving or bats from. And that's more about helping you out where you're at. When this comes out, it'll be a few weeks ago now, but it was the end of October when I went to a fiber festival and got some tunis. And this is, you can see it on screen here. This is just washed. It is not and I bought it raw. I washed it. I have some videos up on how that went, and then another one coming out on how it spins. But anyway, this is just washed, and look how easily it comes apart. And for anyone just listening, I'm just pulling apart the locks. It's super easy. It fluffs up right away. Just a teeny bit of work, and it's already fluffy enough to spin from the cloud should you choose to. A really open fleece like that just takes a ton less work for you. Or you could take some, I've got more fleece in the air right now, and take a lock and kind of extend it out. So I kind of pulled the lock sideways and lengthen it out from where it was probably like an inch wide. Now it's probably 6 inches long. And then you could spin from that just like it's roving. So if you start, and once again, that was Tunis. If you start with something that's very open and springy to begin with, before you even get it, it's already like built into the wool, the intrinsic characteristics. See the dog. The intrinsic characteristic of the wool is that the fibers of the medium wools, especially, they're trying to kind of like separate on the sheep. And that's exactly what you want, is for the fibers to be separate and fluffy when you go to spin them. So there's just much less work for you to do to get them ready to spin. As I mentioned, this is Tunis. Another great one that I've worked with that I think you could use, I want to say straight off the sheet, but honestly, I'd wash it first, is a Jacob. Jacob is super easy to work with. The locks, they're very square, but wow, they separate out really, really easily. And I think if you were looking to do probably more of a worsted spin, and granted, you would, if you were willing to use some tools, you'll get more of a fluffy prep, but you could get a lot of mileage off of just pulling apart Jacob fleece with your fingers and spinning it. So Jacob, Tunis, those both would work great. Our sheep are a Dorset cross, and for the most part, once you wash up those fleeces, they would work pretty well with just separating it out with your fingers and heading on in to spin that too. And once again, you would do a little bit better if you had some cards, but gosh, if you're just happy to give it a whirl and see how things go with no tools, just pulling apart those kind of springy fleeces on just with your fingers. Or honestly, you can like kind of separate out the locks in your hands, spin just like straight from the lock while you're choosing your fleece. And if you want to go with the no tools prep, I think the easiest hit is going to be for a medium type fleece, just because that's going to come to you closer to what you want to work with than any of the other groups of breeds. And I do want to qualify that a touch. In that medium, I did mention Tunis and Dorset, which would both be, you could argue, somewhat of a down type. So the down types, the mediums, anything with the springy, like hard to felt, is an easy way to go here. If you read up on the breed and it doesn't felt super good because of the kind of crazy crimp, but it's bouncy, that's something that is likely to be easier to work with without your tools. Beyond the fleece or the breed specifics would be the other form of fiber that you could work with that wouldn't require any prep, would be if you've got ready to spin roving or top. Now, I have other podcasts on the specifics here, but roving is off of cards and top is off of combs. So most people use those words interchangeably, but most of what you can buy commercially is top. So we'll talk about that. If you get your top, which is most of what you're going to be able to get if you order from most of the big wool suppliers, get your top and kind of open it up, and you can strip it down into little pieces. You can work with it just as it comes on and just spin right across the fibers, just back and forth. You can pull it apart into color sections. You can do all kinds of things, and all you're doing here is rearranging the roving, or pardon me, rearranging the top with your hands, and just your hands, so that it presents to the wheel in a way that suits you better. Another thing that you might come across is, and this would be especially if you're ordering off of somewhere like Etsy, is bats. And what bats will be ready to spin fiber that came off of generally a drum carder. And that's going to look like a big rectangle, like about the size of a pillow, depends on the size of the drum carder, of course. And you can spin directly from the bat. You can strip the bat down into long, skinny pieces. You can strip it so that it makes one continuous piece. You can pull off chunks. You can do all kinds of things. And once again, this is all just with your hands. You don't need to have any additional fiber prep to that. So if you'd look at someone's Etsy shop, and I'm just giving that as an example, your farm shops as well will be the same thing. Those bats, the vast majority of those are going to be ready to go for you to use right now. So if you want a fluffier fiber preparation than what you can get at home, since you're kind of toolless, you don't want to buy any tools, then ordering your fiber as bats, that would be a great way to get more fluffed up or ready to go, ready to spin fiber that isn't the top, which there's nothing wrong with top. It's just sometimes, actually, let's not sugarcoat it here. Most of the time, top is pretty compacted, so the fibers are pretty smashed together. And the reason for that is top is not, believe it or not, I mean, we look at it from our perspective as spinners, top is not manufactured specifically for spinners. For us, the hand spinners, we generally want a ton more air in the fiber supply, and the top just comes so compacted. So the reason you manipulated it a little bit before you spin with it is to get some of the air back in, which you totally can do. No problem there. And plus shipping, anytime you ship stuff, it tends to get smashed down because you don't want to ship air. Circling back to it, bats are a great way to get a nice, fluffy, ready to go fiber to work with that is going to be no tools required on your part. You could use some, you could rearrange things a bit, but you don't need to. Most folks would just start spinning the bat as is. Then the next thing that is involved in your no tools fiber prep, and you might not have thought of it this way, is if you want to get a little bit of a different result without using the tool, how about you consider changing up the technique a touch? And what I mean, I've got my notes down there. What I mean most of the time there is, if you are not using tools to prep your fiber, chances are you're going to be spinning worsted, just because the yarn you'd be producing is going to be more dense anyway, especially if you're starting off with top, because top lends itself to worsted fiber prep. So, but if you weren't thinking of doing worsted, then another option you have is to take your top and pull it apart into fiber links, and then fold them over your finger and spin over the fold. And what that will do is give you like a kind of sorta woolen, not totally woolen, but a little bit closer. And it'll give you a little bit different of a yarn, different of a spin. I actually like it. It's interesting. I do some of the shorter fibers, it's hard to get it to work, but it's interesting. Give it a go if you haven't tried it before. And it gives you a completely different result than if you're normally doing worsted. And it, once again, requires your fingers. That's what it requires. It requires you pulling off staple lengths of your ready to spin fiber and folding it over your finger and getting going. So you can completely change up the yarn you're getting, and you still haven't had to buy any major tools. And for anyone who's interested, maybe you're like, what's with this worsted and spinning over the fold stuff? Good news. That means you're probably a beginner. I'm glad you're here. I have a free mini course for you. It's starts with the absolute basics. Will get you going even if you haven't ever spun anything before, Or you're like, oh my gosh, I've tried a couple times. It's been a huge disaster. That's okay. That's okay. I can help you out. Free course. Sign up for it at woolmaven.com/free. It'll get you going. Let me know how it goes for you. You'll like it. On to, and this is, I know the subject is no tools required. These are technically tools, but you won't have to buy them. They probably are already floating around your house somewhere that you could use or easily get a hold of. The first one is dog brushes. If you have pets, see what you can do. You'd be surprised that just about any dog brush would open up the ends of a lock, for instance, to just fluff it up a touch to make it a little bit more amenable to spinning. And once again, if you have a if it's going to take a ton of prep work to get the fleece you started with fluffed up enough for you to be happy with how it's going to spin up, the dog brushes are probably going to get pretty tedious pretty fast, but you could definitely do it. You could definitely do it. I've seen in our local, it's TSC is where I normally go to look for this kind of stuff, and just spying around in what they have. You have all kinds of options there. I have to admit, anytime I've done anything with dog brushes just to see how it goes, I get annoyed pretty fast. But then I have the other tools, so it's fairly easy for me to say the dog brush is annoying when I have something better. But if I didn't have something more well suited to wool carding or combing, or I just didn't feel I could afford it, I have to admit, I definitely go for the dog brushes. The second thing you can do with tools that you already have around you is start scoping out the kitchen. Start scoping out the kitchen. What you see a lot on sort of like the DIY is people using onion holders, which to me look like hair picks, and they use that as a wool comb. I don't know if you have them, but that should be pretty easy to get a hold of at most any that has kitchen utensils in stock there. If you're really willing to put some work in, you can go with a fork. If it's an easy to work with fleece, that wouldn't be too much work, but that might take a while. And then the other thing, I don't know if you've thought of this before, but if you have any skewers, metal, bamboo, whatever, some people love to spin. They're calling them roll eggs. It's really more like ponies. But so you take a little bit of your fiber and you roll it up, and it's more of a woolen prep than you had before. Take your top, for instance, and pull it apart as fluffy as you can get it, then lay it out in kind of a little rectangle, and then pinch the wispy ends between two of your skewers, and then just roll it up. And then that gives you a faux lag. Some people call it a faux leg, so a fake roll lag. I call it a poonie because it's a genuine roll lag is so light and fluffy. It's tough to get a solid substitute for an actual roll lag off of anything other than hand cards, but you're getting close. You're getting close. So you could use any of your kitchen skewers and sort of rearrange the top that you have, or even part of a bat if you wanted to, and give yourself more of a woolen prep. Now, the other option is sort of more like around the house. If you have knitting needles, you can use the knitting needles or pencils, just like I talked about with the skewers. So take your, what would be a worsted prep, which is the comb top, and pull it apart and make a poonie out of it. And then that gives you just about as close as you're going to get to a more of a woolen prep from what started out fairly worsted. And the reason, if you're new, what this does to you is worsted fibers are all straight, kind of flowing like a river, and woolen, they're fluffed up like a cloud. I think of them as cotton candy, where they're going every which way. And the straight fibers of worsted make a more dense yarn, and the fluffy kind of little cotton candy cyclone of fibers makes a fluffier, softer yarn. So it depends on what you're trying to get. Your top is that you would get, most stuff that you would order would be very, very much so worsted to start with. So if you were to kind of fluff it up the best you could and then make a little poonie with it, with your skewers, with your knitting needles, anything like that, you would get it much closer to a woolen prep, which would just be one more way to do. I realize it's not no tools. It's normal everyday household stuff tools prep that would get you a different way to use your fiber that you probably already have, a little bit different of a spin without putting a ton of money into tools, especially if you don't really know you're going to like spinning that style. And then the final thing, and this really isn't a tool because anybody with the boiling water has it, is steam. If you have not ever steamed a comb top, you should definitely give it a try. Once again, if you remember, when I talked about the comb top, I talked about, oh, here comes the other dog. I talked about how compacted the fibers were in the comb top. So if one of the things that you're having trouble with, because you don't have tools, you want your fiber to be much more separated out, but you don't have the cards that most people would use to do this, sincerely, pull off a piece of your comb top. I just pulled off a chunk like a foot or so long, a countertop water kettle for making tea, coffee. Hold the top over the steam carefully, obviously. You'll be shocked at how it will just poof up. Honestly, I'd say 2 to 3 times how much volume that top took up when you got it versus how much volume it takes up after you steam it. It's impressive. So if you're looking to get more air and more separation into your fiber, honestly, your easiest hit straight off the bat is to go for steam. And you'd think it would make it wet. It doesn't. I mean, obviously, I'm sure it will if you keep it there forever, but just enough steam to poof it up. It's dry and it makes a world of difference. Give that one a shot. So that is what I have for today. Once again, if you want just breed specific, no tools, I'd hit the mediums pretty hard. Mediums pretty hard. And what I have personally worked with is a Dorset Cross, Tunis, and Jacob. Those are all fleeces that I have used that I think would work really, really great for you with no specific fiber tools or with tools that you could get honestly anywhere. For like $10, you could get a dog brush. It would make a world of difference to you. Now, if you haven't heard or haven't checked it out, I do have a spinning membership open. I would love to have you there. Check it out. If you're even the slightest bit interested, it's awesome. We have a super good time there. And I really, really love all the options of spinning and would love to share them with you. If you're interested in the spinning membership, it is woolmaven.com/join. Check it out and please consider joining us. We'd love to have you. Thanks for tuning in for today and see you next time.